You know, it's Friday afternoon, there's no work, I'm taking it easy. Monday, I got Friday on my mind. Gotta have fun at Steve's Taxis. How's it going, Mo? Fan bloody tastic.
Not busy then?
Does it bloody look like it?
So what's happening with that taxi in a shed that's been there for the last 3 months?
Well, I like a bit of drama. Alrighty then. Just before I get started, I just want a quick shout out to We Go Travels and That's Go Miss Official. They are my new friends from the Philippines, so I just want to say hi guys. Alright then, where to begin? I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you that taxi has been locked in the shed for 3 months and I literally was forgetting it was in there. So that's really bad. But I can tell you now, the car is fixed and it is on the road being driven around, and I didn't want to make this part 2 of the video until the car's been drove for a week at least. I will come back to that. There's a specific reason why. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start at the very beginning, just to recap on part 1 of this video, because part 1 of this video was back in August, and I made that video back in August, the early August. And then when the pump in the tank didn't fix the problem, the video got shelved along with the car, and I'll come to that in a minute. But basically what happened, and because this is a Mondeo channel, this car was a particular problem. It was an odd problem to me. It was one that really frustrated me. So I thought, why don't I talk about it? I shouldn't think anyone else is going to have this problem. I think it was a one-off problem. But anyway, here goes. Early August 2019. Mk5 Mondeo 2 litre diesel. The engine, the driver's driving along. The engine cuts out on him. Cuts out dead. The car gets towed back here. I have a look at it, and to start off with, there's no fuel at the injectors, or the injectors don't appear to be firing any fuel. And I think, on the high pressure fuel pump on these cars, there's a little spring that breaks, and then the engines do cut out. We've had quite a few. So immediately I go for that spring, thinking, yeah, it's the same old problem. But it wasn't. The spring was up on the spring on the high pressure fuel pump was fine. But because there's some codes in this ECU, high fuel pressure codes, and I have never in my life had a high fuel pressure code on a diesel. That's what made it peculiar. And then I start looking at other things on the car, like the fuel pressure switch, the fuel rail relief valve. And I start swapping bits and pieces of the fuel system from other cars onto this car to see if it would cure the problem. Nothing seemed to cure it. I checked the cam belt timings, all the kinds of stuff like that. By the way, the car would crank over, but it just wouldn't fire up. It wouldn't even try to fire. So eventually I got to the point where I thought, what am I going to do now? And I had a smashed up car, and it had some good bits on it. So fuel rail, injectors, stuff like that. I kept thinking about the injectors because they weren't firing, and I thought, surely to God, all 4 injectors can't be dead. But I thought, no, of course they can't be. That'd be bloody ridiculous, wouldn't it? So what I'd done was, to start with, I thought I'd carry out a leak-off test on the injectors that are already in the engine. And as I cranked the engine over, I connected my tubes, my washer tubes, to all 4 injectors, and I cranked the engine over, and no fuel come out the injectors whatsoever. It was at that point I noticed that about 5-6 seconds after I'd switched the ignition on and the pump had primed the fuel system, that fuel would start running out the leak-off pipes the wrong way. And that was really bizarre. And I even, I've carried out many a leak-off test on these cars, and never ever have I had diesel fuel run out of the leak-off pipes the wrong way. And you've got to remember, the leak-off pipes, they connect to all 4 injectors. I've disconnected them from all 4 injectors. The leak-off pipe is now connected to the high-pressure fuel pump. That's all it's connected to. So fuel from the high-pressure pump is flowing out of the pump, through the leak-off pipes and out into the air. I could not get my head around that situation. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Eventually, that was it. We kind of lost 2 mechanics here. This was back in the summer, in August. And there was only 2 of us here. We were doing the taxis, the MOTs, the customer work, the sales work. We were doing all the work just between 2 of us. And it was quite stressful. The car then got shelved. The taxi got shut in our shed outside. It got forgotten about, basically. Every time I thought, shall I go and have a look at it, another job come in the door, and that was it. Couldn't get to it, just could not get to it. That's when I put out the video, we've got a vacancy. But eventually, we got some good guys in here now. We've got everything's back up to speed. All the work's caught up with, and I think end of October, beginning of this month, I managed to get back on the car. And so I go in there again and have another look at it. And what I do is I change the high pressure fuel pump, thinking maybe that could be the problem. Now we got a high pressure fuel pump off a second hand one, a cheap one, but it came like brand new. It looked all shiny and new, and I thought, this is interesting, it looks quite new. But anyway, I put it on, it made no difference. We then had a smashed up car with 4 injectors in it. The car was wrote off, and these 4 injectors I know were working perfectly fine. So I thought, stuff it, let's take these 4 injectors and let's put them in this car and just try. I can't believe that all 4 injectors would have died all at once, or the ECU has shut down the injectors. It's one of the 2, and not allowing them to fire. But I swapped out the 4 injectors into this car. The moment I turned the ignition key, the car fired up into life, believe it or not. But there is a big but here. It started up and ran at idle, but it ran like a bag of bolts. The engine was rattling like you would not believe. It sounded absolutely bloody terrible. And if I tried to rev the car up, it wouldn't rev any higher than 1500 RPM. If it went higher than that, the engine would just cut out dead. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, there's something really bloody wrong here. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to stuff these new injectors up. I did then proceed to put my leak-off pipes onto the new injectors to do a leak-off test, because I was still getting this high fuel pressure code. And do you know what, I swear to God, the fuel that come out of them 4 injectors, that the speed the fuel come out of them was unbelievable. I have never seen in all my days fuel flow out of a diesel fuel injector that fast. That says to me, the fuel pressure in the high pressure side of the fuel system was really high. It was so high it was pushing past the injectors badly. Obviously there was a serious problem here, but why the fuel pressure was high I don't know. I checked everything, it's nothing in the tank, it's not the fuel lines, they were all fine, everything else was fine. And in the end I got to the point where I thought, do you know what, I don't know. I give up. I've had enough. There's no more I can physically do. I thought let's take this car to the Ford main dealer, let them have a look at it. So we towed it down there, and I explained to them the situation and everything, and they said, okay, we'll take a look. A few days later, they ring me back and they say, right, we've found the problem. Your fuel system is full of swarf, full of metal swarf, and we need to replace your entire fuel system. Whoop. Sorry guys, that's my alarm going off. So yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, they're saying the fuel system's full of swarf. I've already checked the fuel system, but then I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I put a high pressure fuel pump on this car which hasn't been run, and since it has been run, I haven't checked the fuel filter or nothing, so I don't know if there's something wrong with this high pressure pump that I've put on. And now I'm thinking to myself, have things that I've done to this car, like fitted this pump, caused more problems on top of the original problem? And I'm starting to question everything I've done now, and it's like, oh my god. So I think, well, I can't allow Ford to replace the entire fuel system, because they would put a new fuel tank, a new pump, they would change everything to do with the fuel system. It would cost a fortune. It would cost more than the car's bloody worth, for God's sake. So I said, okay, we'll come and take it back and I'll take another look. So we towed the car back here. I then removed the fuel filter housing and looked inside the fuel filter. There were a few metal specks in there. Now, I'm gonna explain something here when it comes to metal swarf in your fuel system. Let me go and show you something first. Just stick the old gloves on first. There you go. This is a high pressure fuel pump out of a Mk5 Mondeo, 2 litre diesel. This is not the pump off this particular car. This is off a different car that did actually go wrong. Now, I've already taken this pump apart, but the inner part of this pump, you've got a cam lobe. And this cam lobe spins. The camshaft will turn this cog, and this cam lobe will spin inside the pump, and it will pump the pump basically and put the fuel through to your fuel rail. But I'm going to show you something, what's gone wrong and why this has caused metal swarf in the fuel system. So you see all this polished part of this cam, and you see this little rough bit here. For whatever reason, there has been a flaw in the case hardening of this cam lobe, and it has worn away the case hardening, and now the softer metal underneath is getting rubbed away. And this little piece here that's all rough, every time it's spinning round and catching, it's literally putting tiny pieces of metal into the fuel system. You see, and when something like that happens to a high pressure fuel pump, this pipe here, which will go to your fuel rail and then onto your injectors, the metal particles will come straight out of this pipe, straight into your fuel rail. And the thing is, there's no filter here because the filter is before the pump. So what will happen is all these tiny little specks of metal will block up your injectors. So of course I'm thinking maybe I put a Duff fuel pump on it, but then I think to myself, I don't know, hang on a minute. This fuel pump I fitted to this car, even if it was putting metal swarf into the fuel system, it's not going to do it straight away, like bang, because from the moment I started this car up, it run like a bag of crap. For anybody who knows, who deals with these situations, will know that once you start getting metal swarf in your high pressure fuel system, it will block the injectors up and it will cause them to start misfiring to start with. It will eventually cut the engine out till it won't run at all, but there will be early warning signs, like one cylinder will start misfiring, then another cylinder will start misfiring as the tiny specks of metal fill up the injectors. It won't be just like flicking a switch off and cutting the engine out. So I'm thinking, no, it can't be that pump. And there was another thing that was really bugging me as well. Why there was fuel coming out of this pump on the car out of this leak-off pipe the wrong way. So I took another pump like this, and on the car I disconnected the fuel pipes, and I basically connected the fuel pipes on the car to a separate pump in my hand, just under the bonnet I held it, with the leak-off pipe on it. I switched the ignition on and I waited. After the in-tank pump had primed the system, I counted 5-6 seconds and I had a pump held in my hand. All that was connected to this pump was the inlet and return fuel pipes, and fuel still flowed out of the leak-off pipe the wrong way. And that, I just could not get my head around that. All right then. So, I basically got the car back from the Ford dealership, and there's no way I can replace the entire fuel system. It's just going to be ridiculous. So you kind of get where I'm coming from. Metal swarf going into the fuel system, it's going to cause the injectors to misfire to start with before anything else goes wrong. And when I first started this car up, it was running bad to start with, straight away from the get-go. So I looked in the fuel bowl, the fuel filter bowl, and there were a few metal specks in there, but nothing like, I mean, I've seen some cases of metal swarf in the fuel system, and you can get a lot of metal swarf in there, and it's obvious. But this was only a few. But in Ford's defence, I will say there was quite a few specks of something in that fuel system. But the trouble is, it was floating on top of the fuel, so I have no idea what it was, but it didn't look great. And I thought, oh my God, you know what? I don't know what to do now. But this is the direction I decided to go in, which was the wrong direction, but it doesn't really matter. It's what I've done, then it is what it is. We had a smashed up car that was going to go to the scrapyard. The engine in it was running perfectly fine though. So I said to the boss here, why don't I just swap the engine and gearbox with all the wiring and everything on it, just swap it over from this smashed up car and let's see what happens. So that's what we done. And plus the fact, I've never had an engine out of a Mark 5 Mondeo 2 litre diesel. And I thought, this would be interesting to see what it comes out like, what kind of job it would be. And as it turned out, the engines come out of these cars surprisingly easily. In fact, the only annoying part was disconnecting the multi-plugs on the ECU, because I didn't want to unpick all the wiring from the engine. I just wanted to unplug the 2 multi-plugs from the engine ECU and leave all the wiring on the engine. But the them plugs are covered by a metal plate which have got like shear bolts in them, so you've got tamper-proof bolts, you've got to get them out. And they're a bit of a sod sometimes. But I've done that, I swapped the engine over, and then I thought, I'm not going to start this engine up because I don't want to cause any damage to it in case there's something else on the car causing this problem. So I pulled off the injector leak-off pipes from the injectors, I switched the ignition on, the fuel pump in the tank primed the system, you could hear it, and then I waited, and then fuel ran out of the leak-off pipes the wrong way again after all that work. And I thought, yeah, I've just swapped this engine, gearbox, wiring and the fuel tank. I swapped the fuel tank as well from this other smashed up car. So basically there was nothing left apart from the 2 fuel pipes which run front to back, which I blew through with like brake cleaner and a high pressure air line. So there was nothing left on this car to do with the fuel system that hadn't been replaced or at least cleaned. And it was still the same. It was right back to square one. Nothing had changed. I knew straight away, as soon as fuel was coming out that leak-off pipe, there was still a problem. And at that point, I think you can kind of guess this by now, because I actually knew, I know what's wrong with this car, and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to show you. Now, because the car isn't here anymore, I've only got a 14 plate here, so you're going to have to imagine that this Mark 4 Mondeo is a Mark 5 Mondeo, just so I can dramatise it. Come on, come on, come on already. All right then, don't make me do this. This is what I believe is faulty on this car. And you want to know why? obvious really. Marxist leading socialist created an insurgency on the vehicle's brain. Well, sorry Diane, you've been routed. Now feck off. Unfortunately, the vehicle's brain was too badly corrupted to be salvageable. So, I had to now source myself a new engine ECU. You know, these ECUs, they're incredibly technical these days. They're not like the early ones. These things are very advanced. And I guess when they go wrong, they can cause all manner of things. And as for the fuel leaking out the leak-off pipes the wrong way, here's my theory. This ECU, working in conjunction with a fuel metering valve on the high pressure fuel pump, this is controlling the fuel pressure in the fuel rail. And I believe even in the low pressure side of things, from the tank, from the pump in the tank, through the fuel filter to the high pressure pump, this is controlling the fuel pressure. And I'll give you an example. On these Mark 5 Mondeos, if you open, with the ignition switched off, if you open the driver's door, the ECU immediately sends a signal to the in-tank pump to pulse the pump to create a preliminary amount of fuel pressure in the fuel system prior to switching ignition on. So just remember, if you've ever got the fuel filter disconnected or the fuel pipes disconnected on one of these Mondeos and you decide to open the driver's door, I think you'll probably find there'll be a shot of fuel comes out the fuel pipe. So don't be standing in front of it, you'll get wet. Listen, all along this whole process, I didn't want to mention this, but I guess a lot of you have probably guessed this anyway. But throughout this entire process, the ECU was on my mind. But it's one of these things that I have never had an ECU go wrong on a Mark 5 Mondeo. So I didn't, I'm kind of thinking they're pretty reliable. But in this case, it is on my mind, and right now I thought, that's it. This is what I'm going to go for. Now obviously buying a brand new ECU is a lot of money. So what I done was, I went on eBay and we found another ECU with the identical part numbers on it. It cost about £190. I then needed to find somebody who could program it to the car because it's going to be immobilised, it's not going to work. I couldn't find nobody. Nobody could touch it. If it was an earlier ECU of like a Mark 4 Mondeo, it wouldn't be a problem. But nobody that I could find could touch these ECUs apart from Ford. So I rang up Ford dealer and I said, I've got a second-hand ECU in my hand for this dodgy car we've got that I can't get running properly. Can you take this ECU and can you program it to the car? And they said, yes we can. And I thought, great. So we towed the car down to to our Ford dealer again, and they programmed it, and then they rung me up and they said, you haven't turned the key, you haven't started the engine or tried to crank the engine on this car yet. Do you want us to turn the key? And I said, yeah, you may as well. There's nothing else to lose now. Half an hour later, they didn't ring me up. They sent me a text message saying your car's ready for collection. And I thought to myself, they either, the car doesn't start and they don't want to tell me, they don't want to ring me up and tell me, or they've just sent me a text message saying it is ready because it is done. So I rung them up and they said, yeah, the car's running fine. I couldn't believe it. So I went down to the Ford dealer, jumped in the car and drove it back here. And it drives absolutely spot on. I mean, what they did was they programmed the patch system with the mobiliser to the new ECU, well, our second-hand ECU, and they carried out all the adaptations on the fuel system side of things, because when you fit a new ECU you've got to carry out certain adaptations on it. They'd done all that for about £86, which I don't think was bad. I think that was a pretty good price, and that was it. It was the ECU all along. But do you know what? Do you know what really gets me? is that initially when this car broke down, it killed all 4 injectors in that car. It killed them dead. So whatever went wrong with this, I mean, I will never know what went wrong with this ECU, but something drastically seriously went wrong with it, that's for sure. Because to kill 4 fuel injectors, that's pretty bad. So I'm thinking this was a one-off problem. Something went wrong. It's just been a long-winded job. It was an odd job. It was something that will probably never happen again. But it was an interesting story. So that's it. My Jackanory time is over. I can now get on with more sensible things like cracking open a bottle of beer or something. So, I hope you enjoyed my little story. I'm glad it's certainly over. It's been a long time coming. One last thing. I did say at the beginning of this video that I wasn't going to put this video out until the car had been driven for at least a week. The reason being, it's always a worry of mine that something else on the car could have spiked the ECU and caused this problem. But as the car has been out and been driving around fine for a good week now, all is bloody good. See ya. Time to go where you belong. Yeah! See ya!